In this video, we'll explore some of the workflows in Wallworm. We'll start with Goldsrc because it has not been demonstrated much, and there's some new workflow enhancements to share. What you will learn today will remain relevant in the Source and Source 2 videos to follow. Today we'll explore making the scene you see here from scratch in 3ds Max, and by the end we'll be here, running around in the level inside of Counter-Strike 1.6. You will learn how to make basic world geometry in walls, apply materials to world geometry, procedurally distribute props along walls, create, compile, and use custom models, create point entities, create brush entities, trigger a sound, compile, and play the level. We will do this all in just a few minutes. In our previous video, we set the Wallworm settings to CS2. Let's open the global settings and switch to the Counter-Strike preset. Since I'll be doing level design, I'll load some settings that are helpful for this workflow with the Use Settings For menu. This will turn on some things like static prop and rotate, which are good for that workflow. Now we'll explore a tool called Starter Kits in the Wallworm Utilities menu. This toolset allows you to quickly create sandbox levels and startup entities to help test out ideas and learn how to use Wallworm. The basic world function will create a sealed level with a sky material around it so that you can properly compile your sandbox scene. By hiding the sky, I can easily work in the playable area. Notice it also automatically created an info player start entity as well as a light environment entity. I deleted the spawn to demonstrate the Counter-Strike functions that will generate T and CT spawns, as well as bomb targets and Buyzones. Sometimes the spawns don't show textures until you select them with the Modify tab. I'll close the starter kit. Next, we'll adjust the grid size to something appropriate for Goldsrc. Right now the grid spacing is 2, but I want it to be 64. Right-click the 3D Snaps button and click the Home Grid tab. Change the major grid spacing to 64. Change the minor grid spacing to a power of 2 value, like 4. I'll expand the perspective view grid extent so that it extends to the edge of the playable area and turn off Show Subdivisions because I want to be explicit with the grid spacing. I generally want to see the snapping types via the Snaps toolbar. If you don't see it, you can bring it out by right-clicking an empty area of the main toolbars and choosing Snaps. Then enable 3D snapping by hitting the S key or by clicking the 3D Snaps button. Next, I'll draw lines where the walls will be. I want them all to be part of the same line as sub-splines, so once I create the first spline, I'll go to the Modify tab of the command panel and click Create Line. This allows me to create multiple splines in one object, which can help with scene clutter. I'll continue making lines wherever I want walls. If you are new to Max, notice that the line has vertex, segment, and spline subobject modes. These modes allow you to edit the spline in different ways. Subsplines are self-contained splines where none of the knots belong to other splines. Segments are the sections between two vertices or knots. And the vertices are all the points we click to create the spline. We can go to these modes at any time and move around sections of the spline based on the subobject settings. Now we will generate the walls on these splines by clicking the Create Wall from Selected Splines button. This creates a special geometry class called CorvX that was built to facilitate Goldsrc and Source BSP level design. Each segment of the original spline now contains a wall that is a valid solid brush geometry. What makes CorvX so powerful is that it remains parametric, allowing you to change properties on it non-destructively. See how the height is tied to the parameter? We can also change the width and the entire system adapts immediately. To add materials to the walls, let's open the Material tab of the Asset Browser and filter out any of the texture packs we don't want. You should do this if you have textures from downloaded maps that you shouldn't be using in your levels. Find a texture you want and drag it onto the wall. When prompted, you can choose Merge to keep your current material. It's not really relevant for here, but it's good for keeping an existing material as well. To drop textures on sections of CorvX, right-click a material and choose Drop Materials, which will open Wormface. This tool is similar to the Texture Application tool in Hammer. I picked the ends and all ends now get that texture. There is a quirk on the top. We'll just click that and apply the same material to the top. You can also Alt-click any face to send that material to Wormface and then use that for dropping, just like in Hammer. Now to demonstrate some of the convenience of using CorvX. I'll select the CorvX object and right-click a spline in the base splines list, which will immediately set your selection to that spline and set the mode to Vertex Subobject Mode. Now click the Create Line button and create new splines. Look how CurveX will immediately start drawing new walls to follow your spline. I'll add some walls to add some random obstructions. Now let's add some trees from the game assets. In the Models tab of the Asset Browser, search for trees and drag them onto the scene. Use the Select and Place tool to more conveniently move objects around. You can shift-drag any object to copy it. Right-click the Select and Place button to show placement options. Turn on Rotate to easily rotate on the up axis. With this tool, it's easy to place and rotate objects as you wish. Now that I've finished adding some of these props, I decided I wanted to seal off this one bomb target a little bit more. So I'm going to add a line. Notice that when I add a new line, the wall isn't following the same side of the line. This is because CurveX will use the first vertex in the order of the following vertices to control the positive or negative side of a wall. The yellow knots here indicate the first verts. To properly align this wall, I need to select two vertices that are at the same location and weld them together into a single vertex. The right-click menu will show a weld menu. Notice that when this happens, the original walled part jumps to the other side of the line and no longer lines up with the wall across from it. To fix this, go to Spline Subobject Mode, select the spline, and click the Reverse button in the Modify tab. This will send the first vertex from one end of that spline to the other and fix our problem. Now let's demonstrate distributing props along the walls. First, let's create a spline along all the wall tops by selecting the CurveX and clicking the Create CurveX Spline from Selected CurveX Objects button. Notice a new spline along the top edge of the walls. This is a CurveX spline, which has many options for placing splines in convenient parts of CurveX and will adapt to changes from the CurveX objects. We'll stick with the tops for now. Open the Model tab of the Asset Browser, find a light model, right-click it, and click the Create Prop Line button. Now the model is distributed along the wall at the corners. Changing the prop distribution method to midpoint will move them from the knots to the segment midpoints. To see the meshes, go to the Performance and Display rollout and change the Source Model Display mode to Lowest LOD. And in the Transformation rollout, we can move and rotate the models to make them align to the walls. Note, don't use the scale options when working with Goldsrc. While you can scale models in Source, don't do it in Goldsrc. To add lights to the other side of the walls, turn on Side 2 Tops on the CurveX spline. At first, the lights are in the wrong locations. Click the Reverse button for Side 2 Tops so that the direction of that spline will work on the other side with our prop line setting. Once the alignment is correct, let's go back to the spline controlling the CurveX and add more walls. The prop line will not auto-update while editing that spline, but as soon as you exit subobject mode, the props will scatter on your new wall, as you see here. Now let's scatter multiple props randomly along the wall bases. With the original control spline selected, select several ground plants on the Asset Browser and click Create Prop Line. Change the prop distribution order to random and make edits to the distribution method and spacing to get the effect you want. Now let's paint some of the props onto the scene. Select the same props in the Asset Browser, right-click, and click Paint Models. This will assign the models to the native Object Paint tool in 3ds Max. Paint on a surface, and change settings in the Object Paint tool like randomizing the Z rotation, varying the U and V of the asset spread, and the spacing. Once you have the settings you want, you can paint more. Right-click to end the paint. Now to add some character, use the Asset Browser to do some set dressing, using the native tools in Max for placement and orientation. Remember to not use the Scale tool for manipulating the props for Goldsrc, as it's not supported in Goldsrc Model. A couple useful shortcuts for this workflow are W and E, W for Translate, and E for Rotation. You can pop back and forth between these to quickly place and rotate your assets. I noticed late that one of the bushes scattered along the walls is pushing into the ground. This is because PropLine and Object Paint use the model's pivot as the placement point, but this model is offset inside the model data. To fix in PropLine, I selected the model in the PropLine source list and clicked the CA to Cell button. This adds a custom attribute to the source object, and it allows you to control this prop individually from the other assets in the PropLine. Here, I offset it up. To quickly move up all the ones that I had object painted, I select one of the bad props, scroll down to the MDL Utilities rollout in the Modify tab, and click the Select Same Model and Scene button. With all of these selected, I move them all up. They were all laggy to move because they are all instances of objects used in a prop line. By selecting that prop line and turning off auto update, I can then easily move these props. Next, we'll add some models made from an old Wallworm video. Clicking File, Import, Merge allows you to bring in geometry from another Max file. I'll move these to the outside of the playable area. Click the Create WWMT from Selection button. When prompted, I'll make sure to create 3 separate Wallworm Model Tool helpers. The helpers generated contain all the data that you use for exporting and compiling these models, including their names, properties, and export paths. Most options are irrelevant for Goldsrc, so you can stick with the defaults for now. With the 3 helpers selected, click Export Materials and Textures. In the following window, simply click the Export Selected Textures. This will generate the needed bitmap files for the models to work in Goldsrc and place them in the right folders. Now click the Export WWMT to Source Models button. It's named Source, but it works in all the engines that Wallworm supports. Now you'll see the assets in the asset browser. The thumbnails may be backward in some cases, but that's an issue for another day. Just drag them into the scene for distribution. Before distributing these new props, I'll exclude the helpers since they are outside the playable area. With the helpers selected, I click the Exclude from Level button. This tells Wallworm to not export something that it would otherwise export into the game level. Failing to do this with an entity outside the playable area would cause a leak, which we will not cover in this video. Now, using the same methods already demonstrated to place, move, and copy these new custom assets, we'll place them around. When I created a prop line of the bench, I saw that it was pushed into the ground. Since I control this asset, I will fix it by moving its pivot in the source mesh to the base of the bench and recompile the model. This will fix the prop line placement, but I will need to move any bench that I placed manually earlier in the scene. Now I'll simply use the prop line settings to control the bench and trash can placement along the base of the walls as we did with the plants. Once these models are placed, it's time to add a sky. Open the Sky tab of the Asset Browser and double-click a sky to add it to the scene. Unlike with Source 2, the sky function in Goldsrc and Source will create a very large box primitive and place the 6 sky textures on its faces. It also assigned the sky texture to the world spawn entity, which you can access with the World button in the Level Design toolbar. Now let's add some ambiance by adding a bird sound into the trees. Open the Asset Browser and search for birds in the Sound tab. You can double-click a sound to preview it. Once you find a sound you want, simply drag it into the viewport. The sound object is a new helper in Wallworm 7 that allows you to preview the sound in the viewport. I'll place it in the trees and adjust some settings. Another way to add sound or any other point entity is the point entity rollout from the Level Design toolbar. Select an entity and click the Place Entities button to add them into the scene. For brush entities, use the Brush Entity rollout. To trigger our sound, we'll create the volume for the trigger by making a box object. Then choose Trigger Multiple from the entity list and click the Tie to Entity button with the box selected. I'll select the bird sound entity and give it a target name so that it can be targeted by the trigger. Then, with the Trigger Multiple selected, I can click the Pick Target button and select the bird ambient generic entity. I could also simply type the target name in. Now we can open up the export scene as game level UI, turn on the compile map on export and launch game options, then choose a file name and export. The level will export, compile, and launch the game with your level. Here it is. When I walk into that area of the trees, the birds will start playing. I want to do some adjustments, so let's go back into Max and change the light environment angles, color, and brightness. This is a little better, but there's still something wrong. I don't like the ground. I'll hide some of the entities so I can see the ground better and change it to grass and test that in-game. This is better. This concludes this video introducing Wallworm 7 workflows via Goldsrc. Next, we'll cover Source Engine and expose some other tools and workflows, which will then lead us into the Source 2 videos following. My name is Sean Olson. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you and have a good day.